Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Saturday Sampler. Glad you are here. And hopefully life is good where you are. It's a nice sunny day here. We've had a few of those, so it's been really good not to have, the rain and all of that. So if you are coming on, please hop into the chat box and just say hello. Hi, Denise. Good to have you here this morning. I'm going to wait a few minutes. Okay, we got Connecticut and California, so coast to coast. Sounds like it's snowy in Connecticut. You guys have had a lot of weather fronts back that way, at least according to what I see on the news. Lots and lots of snow. So, sunny San Diego. It's where my daughter is. All right. So what people are starting to come on, that's super. I want to talk just a few minutes right off the bat. I'm going to drop down to my table. Last week we talked about doing a temperature quilt a little bit different. And the reason that I chose that as the possibility was that I tried to do a temperature quilt, and you have a lot of enthusiasm at the beginning, but the day after day after day, it was just, I gave up. I didn't get through the year. Wanted to, thought I'd start again where I'd left off. Just never really happened. So I suggested that we go month by month, and if you still want to do weather, that's fine. But I suggested that you go by your own feelings and how you were doing through the week, and to choose colors that went along with that. And so if you were to do that one part of this in a month, you would have your colors for this block, and you only have to make one a month, and this goes together quickly. This one is not, I really didn't do it as temperature. I just grabbed some fabrics, but I'm starting to collect that and work it through, and would very much like to see if any of you are doing it, and if you are, what you're doing and colors that you chose with your fabrics. I'm pulling that out so that I have, a wide range of fabrics, and that they all go together. So when the quilt is done, it's a very beautiful scrappy quilt. So, and I also gave you wrong dimensions for these rectangles right here, and I wanted to correct that. I told you 2 by 3.5. They should be 1 3/4 by 3.5, and then that will give you that 4.5-inch square that was the same as the squares out here. So I made that correction in the chat of the my YouTube video on Dee Christopher quilting, and I also put those directions on the forum. So with the corrected instructions and cutting for that. So we'll put that aside, and please post your temperature quilts, and not temperature quilt, well, I'm calling it a temperature, but it's more of our feeling temperature than it was with the weather outside, even though I tend to talk a lot about the weather outside. All right, we're going to start this quilt today. I'm going to do it in 3 sessions, and I base that on, the time for me and, a busy schedule and things to sort through fabrics, and working to get my supplies together, gather them, and then cut the squares. And that's going to keep you busy. They used CAFE. I also played around. Let me grab my pieces here. I also, just simply because the picture was there, I think I'm going to do mine as well in some CAFE fabrics, and throw in a few others with that. But so I've got a little bit a more, I don't know, tone, and then this one is a little bit more shade because it has a little bit more black in it. But because they, the fabric, this looks a little bit more pastel-y. This is those dark, rich jewel tones. And then I decided I would try something else. I wanted to try black and white. And so that is a possibility, and I think this would truly be very stunning if, you look and, with just black and white, if you have that many black and whites. So there's a couple of things that I want to talk about in terms of you choosing your fabrics and getting those together. But let's talk about supplies, and then we'll get to the fabrics. Kristen introduced me to this. I didn't know it was really out there. I knew that they had freezer paper type sheets, and I used them and found them. But this, I did not know. And it's called Cut Right Heavy Duty Freezer Paper. And it is heavy duty. It's probably about the weight of 3 pieces of freezer paper ironed together. But it certainly doesn't wrinkle and all of that. It's pretty wonderful. And it doesn't curl when you put the iron to it, which I really appreciate, that you can tear it off and you don't have a rolled up piece of freezer paper, even with 2 or 3 layers. It's the one thing with it is you are to only use it with your inkjet printer, not other, and the other thing I tried, because it said it up here, use as stencils prevents bleeding, and I would say that it does a pretty good job of doing that, because once you iron you make your stencil, iron it on, there really is virtually no bleeding to it. And so that was kind of a cool thing, just to put that. So again, if you're running it through your printer to get your pattern or whatever, print on the dull side of the freezer paper. And again, it warns you here, do not use with a laser printer. And this was interesting, and I found it to be true, because I tried, a couple of different things. Cut on inside of lines after printing, which was helpful. But we're not going to talk about the template that you're making this time. We'll do that, and I will come back to this and do that. But they have it in the store, heavy duty freezer paper, and I kind of loved it. And then I want to talk about choosing your fabrics for this. And I talk to you quite a bit about the color wheel and how what the different colors and stuff are. So I'm just gonna open this up, and here's cerulean blue color codes. And on these, if you have a 3-in-1 tool, you're gonna see right here is the pure color. That's your dye that they use for dyeing the fabric in there, and it's cerulean blue. And then here is a little bit of white added to it, and they keep adding a little bit more white until you get down here to where on the screen when I look up it looks white. Both of those kind of do, but it's a very light blue. And then you get the black, so you start with the pure, add a little black, and you keep going until this color truly does look like a black. I can't really see the difference here. I can still see some of the blue in it, but by the time you get here, it's pretty black. And so then, your tone samplings with your gray, adding gray to your fabrics to get that tone, to get your tones. So you got your tones, your shades, your pure colors with black and white. And you can put those up against your fabrics and look at them. I also very much appreciate this palette builder color tool that I discovered, because here you've got your you've got these little circles, and they still tell you all on the back, you know, your triadic colors, you know, what colors to put together and all of that, complementary colors across the, you know, the color wheel. For looking at the fabrics for today, I'm going to talk about, you know, the warm side of the color wheel and the cool side with that. And this is the tints. This is the pure color, which is in here, and then with the white added to it. So all the different colors that you can put in there. So that one was tints. This one is shades, which is, you know, your pure color, and then, you know, putting black in with that. So pure color on the outside, and as you go in towards the center, you get more and more black on that. And again, it has all of the different possibilities color-wise. And then you have the tones, which is gray. So you have your tones on the outside, you know, the pure color, well, as pure as you can be with a tone. And then adding your grays in to get that. And, you know, it's just helpful if you're struggling with what tints and tones and shades are. And then this is the one that I tend to go to a lot because it's the neutrals. And so you have your neutrals on the outside, and then adding gray to it, and you get that, those colors. And so you have your complementary, your split complement, your analogous, your triadic plans with that. And I think that's helpful to start to understand that. So I really think that this is a great tool, and it's very easy to take with you to a quilt store or watching on, you know, online as much as you can. So what I did is, you're going to have two different colors of fabrics that you're going to be, you know, looking for in your stash. These background fabrics are solids, or you could choose a fabric that reads solid. And I have a lot of cherry wood fabrics and, you know, other solids, and so I started going through that. And if I'm going to use cherry wood, I'm going to go into those tones and shades, because they have those richer, you know, colors in their palette. And so when I go pulling from my other solids, I'm going to keep that in mind. And so I just pulled something just to take a minute to look at with the fabrics on this. And please ask questions along the way. And so you're really looking at two different things here. Background, you need, for every block, you need two different backgrounds. One light and one dark, or at least medium light, medium dark, so that there's a value change within those two background fabrics. So you need to find that. And then with what she is calling moons here, the circles in the center, or moons, you also need two fabrics. And those more or less need to complement each other or work together. They don't have to be matchy-matchy. I'm not truly into that. If it falls in the tone-wise and or shade or tint, I'm good. And so what I would suggest is that you find probably your moons first. So I would pull out whatever fabrics you're going to use from your stash that you think would look good. And then what I noticed here, and when I was putting my moons together, I tried different things again for you. And if I put two, say, you know, printed fabrics together that were similar, you kind of lost, you know, the break in the moon. So they could be of the same value, such as this right here, but because of the different characteristic of fabric, they show up. and they look good on that. So I started with pulling out from what I had in Cave, and I didn't really have enough of these, polka dots and other things that he has. I had more of his florals. So I had to go to my other stash to find things that would work in there. This one, when I was done with it, I was okay because it had a lot of value differences. But really the background fabrics were almost the same, and was a little disappointed with myself that I had done that on this particular one. But no big deal, because I made sure that the value was there. On this one, very different, but the value is the same. But because I have polka dots here and I have a floral here, it more or less worked for me, and those show up with a darker jewel tone background. I'm not going to use a lot of probably the real dark backgrounds, but I want to throw a few of those in for balance and change in that. So I would highly suggest that you find your stack of fabrics for these two, and then start separating those fabrics into what would go together. So I just pulled out one of them that I had looked at, and this was my larger print floral, and then I started looking for things that would go with it. And this one, there are some, there are sort of yellow in here, and it had a lot of the same, tones and colors going on in here. So I felt those two would work together well. I also looked at this one and felt that it blended in pretty much to that. The tone and everything is about the same, but because of the character of fabric and the difference in this, and depending on where you cut it in this fabric, you have more contrast with it than in other places, and something very different over here if it cut in there, and you get the purple and whatever. So I felt that either one of these two fabrics could work, and now I just need to make up my mind. So then I went to my solids to look at what would work with these. I felt that one would work, and I would put the polka dots on the side of the pink if I chose to do the pink. Because as you can see here, you also want, what fabric you have to stand apart and have the value change over here. And this one too would certainly work here, and there is quite a bit of contrast with those two. And then what am I going to put with that? I looked at the light pink and I liked it. This worked really well with it. So did this, or I could even put that one on the side of the light pink. So that was that possibility. And then there was this one, where these two colors could work together, or those two could work. And now I just have to play with my fabric and determine, which ones I like best for my solids. And then once I have done that, then I can put that aside and start again choosing. And I'll use the same fabrics probably more than once because I don't have a ton. I have a lot of scraps of Cave, but not enough to make the size of squares we need. So is there any questions in regards to picking out the fabrics? And I know that takes some time to really pull that together and make that work. And then I would suggest that you do, for week number 1, if you get all your fabrics pulled and decided upon with that, that then it's time for cutting. And but before I go to the cutting, I want to talk a little bit more in terms of fabric. Something that might make those moons a little easier for you is to purchase a charm pack, a layer cake, or yardage, whatever. And I went to the Quilt Show website and looked at the different, charm packs and fabrics and stuff that they had. And I think that these will, so if you have a pencil and a paper close by and you want to write some of this down, I'll try to say it slowly enough that you can add to it if you wish. But I found Wallflower by Tilda. That one, falls into that. All the tones were pretty much the same, and when you get done, it has that same quality of look, so you might want to throw a few other fabrics in with that. Potpourri by Kaufman. And then the next one was Tango by Kate Spade. And the next one was Glaze. Wild Poppies by Kaufman. Orchard and Grove from Wyndham. Verona by Blank Quilting. And those were more backgrounds. And so that one was the one I would suggest for if you're looking at backgrounds. And Hyper Nature from AGF. So those were the ones that I felt that had enough differences from the Quilt Show website that if you didn't want to or didn't have in your stash what you were looking for the moons. I just love this quilt. I just think it's fun and it's a little bit different. And so those are some possibilities. And I see that Kristen has put up a lot of links. And the first one was, this can also be made with the background fabrics and a charm pack. And that is true. So she's got charm packs there. All of these charm packs at the charm pack link. And so take a look at that. And I looked at the charm pack link, I looked at the layer cake link, and then I looked into yardage. So those were the ones. Wallflower, Potpourri, Tango, Glaze, Wild Poppies, Orchard and Grove, Verona, and Hyper Nature that I think you could purchase and do well with using those fabrics. All right, now let's move to the cutting and more of the materials. So they give a list of what you need for your materials and yardage and all that kind of stuff. And if you want to make the pattern bigger, obviously you would have to take that into account, because the on-point setting that this is a 22 by 22. So it's more of a tabletop or wall hanger. And then if you use the straight setting, it's 20 by 20. So I know that I'm going to be making a lot more with that. But here I want to share with you a couple of things that in my putting these together helped me. So it says 1 charm pack or 20 5-inch squares for the moons. And so I just wanted to draw your attention when you're collecting materials, where you're going to be able to use the 5-inch squared charm packs. Then going to the cutting, I would like to, this one you can see I think a little bit more on camera. For the background, which is the outside of your moons, it says to cut 6-inch squares for the blocks. And that when they say center blocks, they mean these blocks in here. When they talk about side blocks, it's these out here, and your corner blocks are these. And we'll get to how those are made a little bit differently and all of that when we get to it. But this was one of the first ones I made, and I cut it pretty much to what they said Now I didn't for the background. I, for whatever reason, cut that at 6 inches as well. But for the center, at the 6-inch square, when I was doing the circle, which I'm excited to share that with you in lesson 3. We have 3 lessons with this, because it's just a much quicker, easier, and I think a little bit more successful way than the traditional way that I learned how to make the 6-minute circle. But what I found and discovered is that it kind of pulls together a little bit more, and so I had, it didn't quite make it to, because this back one is truly a 6-inch square, and you can see that this top is a little different, and you do cut them down, but I think that I felt I got a better, and I could cut them down and make them look nicer, which is what I did with the black fabric. And so I cut mine 6 1/4. I didn't think cutting, another 1/4 inch was that big of a deal from this. So for the background, cutting a 6-inch, I cut 6 1/4. You can try it both ways and see what works best for you. And then for the centerpiece, if you're using a charm pack, it's going to be a little bit smaller than that when you do that part of it. And then, so I was able to trim this down and get a really nice trimmed 5.5-inch square when I was done. And I just felt that it looked better, and it's going to be a little bit easier to sew together. All right. And so I did want to show you, and the back side again here, I used the 6 1/4, and just got a much better square when I did that. All right. And with the black and white, I don't know if I completely showed it to you, but make sure that your mostly white is real contrast with your black, and your mostly black is in real contrast with your white, if you decide to go that direction. All right. And let me see if there's any questions. Where do you get the pattern? On thequiltshow.com, and go to that, and you'll find the pattern there. What size squares do we need, so we know if a scrap is large enough? Well, if you have the pattern and you read where it says cut, you know that you will need 5 and 6-inch squares. And if you want to go a little bit bigger to cut it down a little bit nicer, as I did, you'll want at least to get a 6 1/4-inch square out of that. And they have the freezer paper here. I introduced you to the heavy-duty freezer paper that the Quilt Show also has in their shop. Or if you're using regular freezer paper, you do definitely need to have 2 layers at least, and maybe even 3 for this particular pattern to work with. And I also need to share with you that when you are printing off your pattern, you really need to print it to size, because when we get there next week on templates, this needs to measure, and I have drawn extra lines here and messed with mine. And so this needs to be on this side and here, 2 inches. If it's not, your pattern is not going to come out correct. And so we'll talk about if that wasn't printed completely, or you didn't know how to get that 2 inches and it didn't work. I'll show you a way to make sure that template is correct when we get to that. And the freezer paper and stuff does come in a kit, the pattern and the freezer paper. And so Kristen put up there, the pattern is here, shop for the mini moons, and the supplies, and so you can see what there. And she's put a a link. All right. Let me see if there's anything else. All right. I think she's put it up there a couple of times, so that link to get the pattern. So she's saying that in the kit, they've put the pattern, the heavy-duty freezer paper, and a select self-erase pen from Quilters Select, and an easy precision piecing kit. So I think the kit would be very helpful if you don't have those items, and it will be items that you can use over and over again. All right. So for this week, and I know that some of you will want to move on to making your half square triangles. I have some suggestions on that I'll share with you next time. But if you are one of those who needs to keep moving, you're going to put your backgrounds into half square triangles as well as your moons. All right. And let's see. Hopefully there's no other questions. So for week 1, which is today, and throughout this week, find your fabrics, find your backgrounds, and get your supplies together. Make your freezer paper, squares and stuff. Have that already done, and you can cut out and do the cutting. So that's what I would suggest for this week. Fabrics and cutting your squares. And if you, again, that 6-inch, it says 6-inch squares for the center blocks. I found that 6 1/4 worked a little bit better for me. So I would make that suggestion. Then next week we're gonna make some of those half square triangles. Get your templates ready and how to cut those, so that we're all ready on the 3rd week to do that circle sewing and get our circles in and make our full block with this, and also then how to put the quilt together and make that happen with the side pieces and the corner pieces. All right. So I don't see any other questions on there. Again, just have a great week. And I'm sorry about the size difference on that, but instead of 2 by 3.5 on the temperature quilt, it was 1 3/4 by 3.5. And that was just a math mistake on my problem, and I apologize for that. Math is not my strong suit when it comes to that, and which is no excuse, because I do it all the time with patterns. But that was it. All right. Have an absolute wonderful week. Take care of yourselves and do something wonderful. And as you finish up with your temperature quilts and things towards the end of the month, would love to see your work, or if you finished other work, put it on the forum. Go to hashtag Dee Saturday Sampler for Instagram, or send me the pictures and I'll share them online.